Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I have been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for OnSI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through yet another season together. As always, you guys can find our 100% free, 24/7 boots on the ground content covering the Jacksonville Jaguars each and every day when you follow us on social media such as Facebook and Twitter, and you can also find us at Jaguars on SI. You can find us lastly at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. All right, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. We are now back after the bye week. We were back in the facility for the Jaguars post-bye, prep for the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday. First time back in facility in a few weeks due to the bye week and then obviously the week spent in London. And it was, frankly, a very informative day. A couple of the key things, really, that we noticed, that we heard. First of all, out there at practice, I don't know the exact reason or the rule, etc. But Monday practices, unless you're a team, I think, doing Thursday Night Football, you don't have to give an injury report. Monday practices are normally during the season only on those weird sort of weeks, like a Thursday Night Football week or something that's coming off a bye week, like the Jaguars are this week. So you don't get many Monday practices to begin with. So no injury report from the Jaguars practice, but from what we saw, there's some key and clear injury updates and some that we're going to have to wait and see how guys are looking at the end of the week. Now, I think arguably the most important one, obviously, Brian Thomas Jr. left Week 7 versus the Los Angeles Rams at the very end of the game with a shoulder injury. At least it looked like, a shoulder. It looked like he was, very, holding it gingerly, was in a lot of pain. And from what we saw on Monday, there weren't any limitations. He was out there practicing, at least, we can't tell from our vantage point if it's full or limited or whatever, but it looked like in a little bit of time that we were out there that Brian Thomas Jr. was going through a normal practice for him. Obviously, the Jaguars, there's been a lot of noise around Brian Thomas Jr. In the last, really, since this season has began, just because his production has not been there. We've gone over all the stats that have dropped so rapidly in his second year. But, of course, Diana Rossini, The Athletic, had a report on Saturday. It said the Jaguars were listening to offers for Brian Thomas Jr., even if a trade was unlikely to happen. On Monday, Jaguars head coach Liam Cohen was asked about Brian Thomas Jr. Wasn't asked about the trade report or rumor. Wasn't asked about anything to do with the trade. He was asked if he still has the confidence Brian can, kind of hit the ceiling everybody was expecting after his early season struggles. And he unprompted led with, they're not trying to trade Brian Thomas Jr. Know that they saw the report, and that's not happening. And I firmly believe, frankly, with how transparent Cohen has been, that if that wasn't the case, he would have just not said anything. Cohen made it clear they weren't shopping ETN. At the time, a lot of people thought that might still be the case, but at the time, as we reported here, the buzz around the league was no, they were shopping Tank Bigsby, who they eventually traded. He hasn't seemed to make any promises about players in terms of them being there or not going anywhere and end up being wrong about it. So, I don't think this is a case of coach speak when Liam Cohen talks about Brian Thomas and he says that they're not looking to trade him. And just because they're not looking to trade him doesn't even necessarily mean, obviously, that they haven't gotten calls about him. I'm not saying they have or haven't. But what I am saying is that the general impression from talking to people around the team since that report is that they're as confused about where it came out as anybody else. And even more confused by the notion that some people think they're shopping Brian Thomas Jr. because it's not happening. The Jaguars are already thin at wide receiver. Like, if you're just throwing everything else out, not even using any evaluation for Brian Thomas Jr., the Jaguars are super thin at receiver. If they traded Brian Thomas, their best receiver would be a guy who's also playing corner and hasn't been able to focus just on receiver at any point in his rookie year so far. De'Ami Brown's been injured. And then beyond that, Tim Patrick's injured right now. I believe had a groin injury against the Rams. He was working off to the side with trainers on Monday. So, yeah, some coaches will get up there and tell you, no plans to move this player, everything's great, etc. And then the team will trade him the next day, release him the next day. I believe, based on how Liam Cohen has operated to this point, that is not something he would do. I don't think he would put himself in a position to kind of talk out of both sides of his mouth. I think that he'll give you the truth, or he just... The truth is, frankly, that, yeah, we're looking at trading him. I think he wouldn't have said anything. Also limited, I shouldn't say full limited, guys. There was no full limited. But also working off to the side for the Jaguars. Not completely practicing. Devin Lloyd, along with Quentin Morris, obviously. Tim Patrick. Brendan Strange was out there working, running with the trainers off to the side. You can tell it's, at least from my perspective, it looks like the early stages of him starting to get working back to the side with the trainers. Still has to miss at least the next 2 games. Whether to have Devin Lloyd or Tim Patrick on Sunday, I think, is actually a big question. Now, I'm not saying like it's a question of whether it'll be available, but the impact that it would have. Tim Patrick's made some plays for the Jaguars lately. And when you're looking for more consistency at that position, why not look to the most veteran and experienced guy of the group? And, they only carry 5 receivers on their active 53-man roster anyway. So if anybody's hurt, anytime, it normally creates a question of, do they have the depth to kind of get through the week? I would assume they would do what they did when De'Ami Brown missed week 4 and would bring up Austin Trammell. But it's a fair question. Lastly, I thought the last important thing to come out of Monday's day at the facility was what Cohen said and what Greg Newsome said about Greg Newsome's transition. I mean, Greg Newsome said he thinks the bye week came at the perfect time for him and noted that a lot of people probably didn't really understand the transition that he went through. It's, one, the emotional transition of leaving Cleveland. Was a key piece there for years. First round pick there. Had told us after he got to Jacksonville that he didn't know he was possibly being traded. Had no idea anything like that was coming. Practices with the team once. Gets thrown into a game against the Seattle Seahawks. Go cover arguably a top 3 receiver in the NFL right now. The next week plays more, but is going back to London for the second time in 3 weeks. One of only a handful of players to play multiple games over season to season. So, I think for Greg Newsome, the best is still to come. I'm still a believer, frankly, in his talent and his fit within, what the Jaguars are doing on defense. But that transition was a very real one. And Liam Cohen said that they believe he's getting more of an understanding. Greg Newsome said he, at practice, is hearing the call, calling plays out, and is feeling comfortable, no questions. So that's somebody that they need to play well. And if he does, it could greatly help them as they make this little push going forward to the end of the season. That's all we have for today's episode. Thank you as always for joining me. We'll be back next time.